watch it again. Si necesita ayuda en español, por favor, envíe un correo electrónico at studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. So this evening's session will focus on the recommended adjustments included in the recently shared revised draft of the 25-26 enrollment proposal. As a reminder, tonight's session was prepared by the Office of Student Assignment, and the information we will review with you this evening is a subset of the full presentation that was shared with the Board of Education during their work session on October 15th. Again, this evening's session will focus on the recommended adjustments included in the recently shared revised draft of the 25-26 enrollment proposal. Otra vez, si necesita ayuda en español, por favor, envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. So before we begin, let me go over some logistics. Our session will last for no longer than an hour and a half. We will begin with the presentation and we will conclude by responding to the questions from tonight's session. We recognize that now and throughout the session, you may have questions regarding the proposal or the recommended stability rules. In order to capture your questions, we will be using the Q&A feature within Google Meet. To access this feature from a computer, please click on the three shapes in the toolbar on your screen. If you are using a mobile device, please select the three dots first, then select the icon with the three shapes. You should then see a Q&A feature identified by a question mark icon. To ensure your questions are anonymous, our host and moderators will be monitoring the Q&A for questions and capturing them throughout this evening's session. Once you see that your question has been removed from the Q&A, that means that your question has been successfully captured by our moderators and you do not need to resubmit your question. We will make every effort to respond to your questions towards the end of our session. In addition, we will also use your questions to update the FAQ portion of our website. Si necesita ayuda en español, por favor, envíe un correo electrónico at studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana. In addition, if you have specific questions you feel have not been considered by staff or the Board of Education regarding the current revised version of the enrollment plan, we encourage you to participate in the thought exchange. This thought exchange will remain open through November 3rd. After it is closed, we will summarize the feedback received through the thought exchange, and we will share this summary with the board during their work session on November 12th. And no one will be personally identified in this summary. So before I turn things over to Ms. Susan Pulliam, I would like to remind you that tonight's session, you guessed it, is about the recommended adjustments included in the recently shared revised draft of the 25-26 enrollment proposal. The revisions that we will discuss tonight are related to stability rules, new schools, existing schools, calendar application changes, and process timelines. By the end of this evening's session, you will have had the opportunity to, 1, briefly review the assignment planning process, 2, review recommendations included in the revised draft of the enrollment proposal, and 3, and perhaps most importantly, share questions that you have that will help you gain a better understanding of the potential impacts of the proposed plan for your family. And now, without further ado, I would like to turn things over to Ms. Susan Pulliam.
Lois, thank you for welcoming everyone. And those of you that are guests tonight, thank you for joining us. And to our staff that's helping to moderate, again, thank you for being here as well. We're happy to be here and share with you some of the revisions that were suggested, or all of the revisions that were included in the update to the proposal that was shared with the board on October 15th. To provide some context, this year's student assignment plan is specifically focusing on the opening of Bowling Road Elementary, Pleasant Plains Elementary, Rex Road Elementary, and Felton Grove High School. In addition, the proposal also includes some base assignment changes, calendar application changes, and other recommendations to relieve crowding at some of our capped and overcrowded schools while filling some of our underutilized schools. The proposal also includes recommendations for stability rules for families impacted by the recommendations included in this current proposal. The initial draft was presented to the board on September 3rd, and we conducted a series of public engagement events and open house included after the release of the initial plan to help families better understand their proposal, what was included, and to make sure that we understood what questions that families might have or concerns families might have about the recommendations included in that first draft. When we put out there opportunities for families to engage, you engaged at a really high rate. So those of you who've been participating with us throughout this entire process, thank you. Your feedback is extremely important as we continue to evaluate and revise the plan, as well as respond to concerns from the community. We have worked to capture and respond to as much of the information or the requests and concerns that we've received as possible. And in addition, we've actually worked to review and consider all of the issues that have been brought forward through these various public engagement events. On October 15th, we did conduct a thorough review of all of this information with the board and also shared with the board a few revisions to the initial draft based on the feedback that we received during that time period. Just for your information, all of the information that we've collected, all of the public engagement efforts that we've sort of engaged with, all of the summaries of those activities are available on our enrollment proposal site. That's the one highlighted in blue at the top of your screen that you see here. Um, And so that will be where you can find those posted summaries. In addition, every week to 2 weeks, we're putting additional information on the site as we get updated frequently asked questions, as we get updated video resources, and as we get updated summary reports. So please continue to review and visit this site as regularly as you can throughout the process, maybe once or twice a week tops. In addition, all of the information that we're going to share in this evening session is posted to this site as well. Again, as a reminder for those of you that may just be joining us, we're going to be using the Q&A feature in the Google Meet to capture your questions for tonight's session. So please continue to use this feature to post your questions. If you're using a computer, you're going to look for these three shapes somewhere on your toolbar, and that'll get you access to that Q&A tool. If you're on your mobile device, you're looking for these three dots first, then look for the three shapes, and ideally you're looking for this question mark to access that Q&A feature. As a reminder, we are going to make sure that all of your questions are captured confidentially and anonymously. So you'll see that when you see that your question has been removed from the queue, that lets you know that our moderators have successfully captured your question and will address it later in this evening session. Also, we have a distinct and different thought exchange open at this point in response to the revisions that were shared with the board on October 15th. So if you have any additional comments, concerns, questions that you feel have not already been addressed by either staff or the board, please contribute to this thought exchange, and it'll be open through November 3rd. We will provide a summary of all of the information that we've collected from families and all of the concerns and questions that have been captured to the board at their November 12th work session so that they'll have that prior to the November 12th public hearing on the enrollment proposal. Really quickly, while we have you all together, one thing that we'd like to do is make sure that everyone on the call has an understanding of the planning process that we use, but I will go through it briefly. So those of you who have been plugged in very long with us all along throughout the whole process, we'll talk about this very, very quickly. So the WCPSS.net website has a specific page called assignment planning. This one is separate from the enrollment proposal site. This is a perpetual website, meaning it will exist kind of all the time. This is where we're posting information about our planning process. So next year, the year after that, things like that, anytime you're looking for information on the planning process or any updates to things like the forecast, etc., you can find those here. The enrollment proposal site that I shared with you earlier is what we call a time limited site. And so that site is only open during this part of the process when we're talking specifically about the 25-26 proposal. So that site will eventually expire in the coming months, but this site will remain open all the time. As a friendly reminder, we have a policy, Board Policy 4150, that guides all of our work for the assignment plan itself, in addition to other guiding pieces of information that we collect to help us achieve the goals that are stated here, which are the four pillars of stability, proximity, operational efficiency, and student achievement. What the policy asks us to do is to balance all four of these pillars, not to necessarily prioritize or rank them in any particular order. However, each pillar is evaluated and assessed with each recommendation to ensure that we are doing our absolute best to maintain compliance with the policy. We'll now take a brief moment to watch a brief video that will help explain those four pillars in better detail. And so if you will just join us for a moment and watch this video, and then we'll sort of reconvene and get into the meat of today's presentation.
Understanding student assignment. It's no secret that our school district is growing, and it's growing fast. That means each year we need to address overcrowded schools and often need to open new schools to keep up with this growth. To state the obvious, we may have to reduce the enrollment at an existing school or fill new schools with students. This is done through the annual student assignment process. To best understand when and where new growth is coming in our district, we conduct an annual enrollment forecast. This forecast helps us look ahead up to 10 years and project enrollment growth throughout the district. This information helps us update our capital improvement plan and to make more informed decisions related to school assignments. Each year, some students are assigned to one of our new schools or reassigned to an existing school. This ensures we have balanced school populations across the district. We know families love their schools and that student assignment decisions can be worrisome. That's why we want to be completely transparent in how we make them. Our school board has established 4 pillars that guide each and every student assignment decision. Here's what they mean and how they work together. Student achievement. We want all of our schools to provide the best academic opportunities for our students. This pillar compels us to think about whether a student assignment plan can help reduce high concentrations of poverty or low-performing students at some of our schools. Stability. Essentially, we try to keep as many children at their current school through the exit grade as possible. When reassignments are necessary, we provide the opportunity for some students to submit a stability transfer request and stay at their current school through the exit grade. Operational efficiency. This pillar is about making sure all of our schools and transportation resources are at their best use. Overcrowded schools are a problem. Classrooms packed with too many students are one thing. But then there are the endless carpool lines, bathroom facilities that can't comfortably accommodate everyone, and having to start lunch when most people are still working on breakfast. On the flip side, having under-enrolled schools is an inefficient use of public resources, particularly when there are crowded schools nearby. Proximity. Okay, this one can be a little tricky. In a perfect world, houses would be built in neat little rows on a predictable timeline and at a slow and steady rate. As it is, we live in an imperfect world where lots and lots of homes pop up in one area, while growth is slight or non-existent in others. For this reason, it is impossible to send every child to their most proximate school unless we want some of our schools bursting at the seams while others are half empty. That said, this pillar states that we will send students to schools within a reasonable distance. Often, the difference between the most proximate school and the next most proximate school is no more than a couple of miles. Please remember that we must consider all 4 of these pillars when making assignment decisions. There is no priority among the 4 that applies in every situation. It's a balancing act that ultimately helps us come up with the best possible plan for everyone. Thank you for working with us to ensure our school system continues to serve all students well.
It always wants to restart. Thank you for taking time to watch that video with us. We just wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to see that that resource is available. If that was helpful to you and you think others might benefit from being able to have access to that video, it is posted to our website as well. Again, every resource that we're sharing with you tonight is available on our website. So, in addition to Board Policy 4150, there's a series of pieces of data and information that sort of inform the planning process over time. And so one of the things that we look at is the first step in our process is really when we get our presentation of the annual student membership forecast. That includes both 1 and 10 year projections, as well as some things on the in between. This is a multi-department and sort of agency effort so that it works to help not only us but our Wake County commissioners have a better understanding of what student membership growth is going to look like in our county. So the 1 year portion of that forecast really helps us to think about our budgeting and planning for the upcoming school year, and that 10 year forecast helps us to keep an eye on what it's looking like down the road, so that we can be really mindful of that growth over the time as we're making enrollment plans and making assignment decisions, as well as other decisions that the district makes. Even though it does provide a 10-year forecast or a 10-year projection, we do redo it or update it every year so that we can take advantage of any new or updated information from our town and county planners regarding any things that are changing in residential development or commercial development across the county, as well as any other types of corporate changes that might change the demographics of the students in the district or how many total students we might be serving. One of the other aspects of this forecast is that while knowing the total number of students that we're going to serve is important, knowing where they're going to be distributed throughout the district is also important. So here you see a visual that helps to reflect where that projected growth that we're seeing over the next 10 years is expected to show up across the district based on what we knew as of last year about residential development across the county. We are currently actively updating our forecast, getting ready for next year. So that process is happening now, and you can look for an updated forecast in February of 2025. Another portion of information that's really helpful for us as we're thinking 1 year ahead, not just 10 years ahead, is what is the crowding already looking like? And so here you see an example of the projected crowding for the 24-25 school year. These projections were done in March based on that original forecast. And so these projections were helpful for us as we were determining which schools maybe would need to maintain a cap or perhaps need other types of assignment uh, adjustments to help deal with crowding or underutilization. And here you can see a quick review of how that looks across all the different levels. So the map on the far left represents the elementary school crowding. Here is the middle school, and here is the high school. These have not yet been updated based on actual enrollment, and those will be coming soon. If you pay attention to the board meetings, it'll probably be late November, early December when these updates are provided based on current membership. Another piece or step 3 sort of in our 6-step planning process is then to look at what the results are of the update to the annual capital improvement plan or CIP. As you can see here, this graphically represents where all of the new schools are projected to open across the district over the next several years. Here you see the Woods Creek location, which opened this year in July as a multi-track year-round elementary school. It did serve as a swing space for Bauckham students while Bauckham was being renovated, but it now is open and operating as its own independent school. Those that you see in orange are the ones that are listed or scheduled to open for the 25-26 school year, and those are the ones that are included in this year's enrollment plan. And then all the others in the sort of darker gray, black kind of circles that you see across the district, those are in the out years of the capital improvement plan, meaning further out in the future. Here you see that same information displayed in chart form. And again, just highlighting that these are the 4 schools we're working to develop attendance areas for because they are projected to open for 25-26. And then those that are below it on the chart will be the ones we'll be developing plans for as we move out. We do like to take a moment and always remind everybody about the asterisk that you see beside each of these school names. Let's see if I can get my mouse to work again. I've lost my mouse. There we go. So these asterisks that you see here across all of these schools share just a reminder that these are large construction projects. And so these, along with all of our major renovation projects, are subject to normal construction issues. So if there are any market changes, scope or schedule changes, even market volatility issues regarding supply and demand and material availability, those can all impact these schedules. And so we just try to work with our facilities design and construction team to make sure we're as up to date as possible with these construction schedules. So as of right now, and as of the presentation that we gave on October 15th, our facilities team has told us that the 4 schools highlighted, Bowling Road, Pleasant Plains, Rex Road, and Felton Grove, are all still on schedule to be ready to open for the 25-26 school year. And as of today, those 3 elementary schools would all be available to open as a multi-track year-round in July. So once the capital improvement plan is updated, then we're really ready to start truly diving into the current year's enrollment planning process. There's a little bit of overlap in the schedule. We start with the public engagement process in spring, and this is a change or an update from previous processes. Historically, we really wouldn't actively do public engagement until after the initial draft or first draft was released sometime in September. We've heard from the community that they'd really like to know a little bit more in advance what the thinking is and what the planning process looks like. So, about 2 years ago, we started a process of engaging communities early on, particularly when we're talking about the opening of a new school. So, we've been going out and inviting families to participate in conversations as early as March, 2 years prior to the opening of a school, so that we can get a better sense of what's important to the community as we come up with final recommendations. So that This year, that process started in March and ran through May. Um, then we collected a lot of feedback from those sessions, including thought exchanges, as well as the actual face to face public engagement pieces, as well as our virtual sessions. And so during all of those processes, we not only collected the information, but we really reviewed it, summarized it, and really wanted to make sure we had a full scope of what that information was telling us that was about what was important to the community. All of the summaries for those sessions are posted to our main assignment planning website. So you're welcome to go there to see both the 2023 and 2024 links to all of the session summaries. One question we constantly get, and we really made a point to talk about this during the October 15th presentation with the board, is does this feedback do anything? Does it really go anywhere? Does it mean anything? How does staff actually use the feedback that they're collecting in these various processes to inform the planning process? And so I'd like to start here just with stability rules. What may not be evident to you if this is your first year really plugging into the assignment planning process is that our stability rules have become more and more generous over the last two cycles based on the feedback we've received from the community. If you'll look by way of example, um, historically, only rising fifth grade students that would be assigned to a new elementary school would be eligible to have a stability transfer and stay at their current school. And if they had a younger sibling, they would only be eligible for that 1 year that the fifth grader was still attending. So, what that would look like is if you had a rising fifth grade student and a rising second grade student, the rising fifth grader would be eligible to stay. The rising second grader could join them for that 1 year. Then, when the fifth grader moved on to middle school, the second grader would be default reassigned to the new elementary school. And so historically and by policy, that was sort of how we opened our new elementary schools to ensure that there was a full complement of kindergarten through fourth grade students and that it had a really robust student population. Based on community feedback and a desire for more stability for their students and their families, those now have been expanded to include not only fifth grade, but also fourth grade. So, no matter what, if you're a rising fourth or fifth grade student, you'd be eligible for those stability transfers. In addition, the younger elementary students all the way down to rising kindergarten would be eligible to join their older sibling and remain through the end of fifth grade. So, in that other example that I gave you, the fifth grader could stay, the second grader could stay. And then when the fifth grader moved on to middle school, that second grader could just continue on at that same school through the end of fifth grade without being assigned to the new school. What this does is gives families the option for stability to have their children attend the same elementary school throughout as long as they're close enough in age to be in elementary school at the same time. And then it also still gives you that option in the background that if at some point in time it makes more sense for that younger student to go to the newly assigned elementary school, you certainly could do a back to base transfer at any point in time, and we would be able to help you do that, for any at the start of any school year. So that's a specific example of an improvement. Similar examples exist at the high school level. The younger siblings of those older students usually only got to stay for the 1 or 2 years that their older student remained, and then would have to go on to the new high school. That's not the case anymore. Those rising ninth and 10th grade siblings would be able to stay through the 12th grade if they so chose. At the other side of this, we've really worked to expand the stability rules at the elementary and high school. We haven't had to deal with the middle school so much. Actually, the middle schools it works too. We were just doing side by side comparisons. But another piece of feedback that we heard from families and from schools, particularly principals that are thinking about staffing plans and so forth, is that when families are assigned from a school that's already open to another school that's already open, so a sort of a shuffle or a cascade or a domino to take advantage maybe of some newly made available capacity or because of shifts related to the opening of a new school. In these situations, we can offer even more stability. Again, in these instances, in the past, it was just the rising fifth grade student that would be eligible to stay at their current school for that 1 year, the younger sibling for that 1 year. They would have those same rules that we had for new schools. So based on community feedback and talking with our school staff about having a stable staff complement, having plenty of time to think about staff planning for having the right number of teachers for the right number of classes and make sure you can maintain your specials and all of those sorts of things. We've recommended to the board and they've been amenable to much more generous stability rules in which all students at any grade would be eligible to stay as long as they could provide their own transportation. So I will say that the compromise we've had to make here is that in order to make that stability available for families, we did have to cut back on the availability of transportation. So at this point, currently, none of our stability transfers are coming. Our stability transfers would be eligible for transportation, because we're trying to make sure you have at least the stability of school assignment. We just don't have enough bus drivers, which the shortage of bus drivers, not only locally but nationally, is just really keeping us from being able to expand any transportation options there. So those are some examples at the stability rule level, but here's some other ones that I don't know that everybody is really keenly aware of, particularly if you're only engaging for the first time because this is the first time you've been impacted or you're a relatively new resident. So the assignment planning timeline, it may not be well known to many people on this call, but years ago, December was when the initial draft of the enrollment plan was released, and the board didn't vote on it and approve it until February, which would mean that if they approved it in February and your student was switching to a year-round school or going to be attending a new year-round school, you'd have from February to July to kind of figure out your family plan for that change. Now, over the years, we've backed it up and backed it up and backed it up. And so this year, for the first time ever, we actually presented the initial draft at the first week of September. That's the earliest it's ever been presented. And again, that's specifically in response to community feedback and family feedback saying, hey, we need to know as early as possible what these potential changes might be so we can make plans and adjust accordingly. In addition, the plan is now being approved in November, which allows families plenty of time to participate in those stability transfer processes before we break for the winter holiday, so that you know before you leave in December for your winter break that all of that's been taken care of. You know that your stability transfer is in hand, and you can rest assured and enjoy that second semester without having to worry about that. Another piece that may not be well known to the community as well is that in recent history, we actually had situations where particular attendance areas or addresses could have been reassigned as frequently as every year, particularly in the high growth portions of the district where we're building new school after new school after new school. A particular address could have been assigned to an original school, a long-standing school. A new school was built, they got assigned to that school, and then a year later they were assigned to the next new school. After 1 or 2 years of that situation happening in those high growth portions of the district, feedback from the community said, hey, th- we get that you've got to open the new schools and we get that there has to be some shifting, but can we not make it every year? That's just so destabilizing for families. It creates so much inconsistency for our students. Can we please put some sort of parameters on this? And so we've been working really hard to make sure that we are not reassigning any area more frequently than every 3 years, which means at the end of the third year and the start of the fourth year, it is possible that a particular attendance or address could be assigned to a different school. And we do have at least one example of that in this year's enrollment plan. We do try to avoid that, but that'll be the nearest term. Ideally, we'd love to wait 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years wherever possible, particularly in high growth areas. But at the bare minimum, in response to feedback, we only do that the closest or most frequently we will do it is every 3 years. Last year, there was a call from families that were being assigned from multi-track schools into a traditional school, and it was a really big shift, where pretty much the entire school population was changing. And based on that community feedback, we were able to respond to that and change the calendar of one of our schools, Pleasant Grove Elementary, from traditional to multi-track based on that feedback. So that's not the ideal time to do that because obviously in late November, making that shift, the school staff had a very short window to really gear up and be prepared to start a year-round school that next July. So ideally, we'd like to make those decisions earlier in the year. But again, in response to community feedback, the board felt it was the right thing to do. You can also see some additional ideas over here on this side of the slide that talk about other things that have happened. You can check these out on your own. I want to kind of get to the meat of today's presentation, but we just wanted to make sure that you did understand that the community feedback we receive is really vital to the planning process, and it really does have a impact on how we do the planning process. Once we start that public engagement, we also start to have conversations with the board as early as May to say, hey, in addition to the opening of new schools, what else do we need to consider? And so this year, again, just as a review for those of you that have been plugged in all the way, opening of the 4 schools was critical, continuing to address capped and overcrowded schools wherever possible was critical, and then addressing a few of our school choice options, particularly those that you see here listed on the slide. So we got confirmation from the board that that was the direction we needed to go and minimize the plan in terms of lots of changes and really focus on the opening of those 4 new schools. In September, we were finally ready, based on all the information that we had to date, to bring a set of recommendations to the board in alignment with that May conversation. And then once that was released, we had our round of public engagement, with which some of you may have participated in, where there was a lot of public engagement, and you're certainly welcome to review the full comprehensive deep dive that we did with the board at the October 15th presentation. We will not take time to do that in this session. It is, again, posted to our website. But I did want to take a quick snapshot here to say it's probably not surprising, but one of the outcomes of doing some of the engagement that we did was to be able to sort of look and see how comparative groups are responding to different themes or topics. And in our thought exchange, it became very clear to us that in some cases, so if you look in column A over here where it says side A, for some families and participants, proximity and commute considerations were of really high importance. However, calendar consistency, maybe for that particular group, wasn't as important. And then the reverse was also true. For some families where calendar consistency for their family was really, really important, perhaps the proximity and commute considerations were less important. Either way, for both of those groups, regardless of, what was more important to them, proximity and commute or calendar and consistency, the stability for their students was keenly the most important. And hopefully you see that reflected in the stability rules that we've been recommending over the last couple of years. You see a similar comparison for those that thought perhaps calendar consistency was important as compared to maybe academic offerings at their new schools. But again, with either of those groups, even though they might have disagreed or not had as much consensus around those two topics, they did have consensus around stability for students. So again, I hope that is evident in those more generous stability rules that we've been coming up with over the last couple of years. And then another group that we looked at was stability for rising 10th graders. We had a lot of families, particularly with the opening of a new high school, concerned about what that's going to look like for their rising 10th graders, where the calendar consistency, and let's be honest, at the high school level, you're probably not thinking about calendar as much. So that maybe was less important to those families. But for those that were thinking about calendar consistency, maybe they weren't really worried about high school yet. Maybe their students weren't that age. But for those two groups, regardless of how they fell on those two topics, proximity and commute considerations were really important. And so hopefully you're seeing some of that reflected. Obviously, we can't address that in every situation, just like we can't for stability. But hopefully you're seeing some recognition of trying as best we can to get families, where possible, to schools that are a little bit closer to home. It's not always possible, but I will be honest about that. Again, a full review of all of that information is on our 2025 enrollment proposal. And I was just made aware by our communications office today that all of the information that was presented in the slide deck, for those of you who looked at it, where it really gave a very detailed response to some of the questions, not just a simple FAQ question answer, those have now also been uploaded to the website, so you can review those at your leisure. And so now at this point in the process, we were ready to give that review of the feedback to the board. And so that's what we did on October 15th, a week ago today. And then we also shared a few recommended revisions based on that feedback that we collected. So just a quick visual, we're in step 4 of our planning process. Once the board approves the plan on November 26th, that's the target date, then we will start shifting our efforts into talking about, hey, where were we able to resolve some capping issues? Where were we not able to resolve some capping issues? Where were we able to review crowding issues to where we don't need new caps? Where did we not have sufficient new school capacity to do that? And do we maybe have some schools that perhaps need a cap? So those cap school conversations will start as early as December this year, with an idea that the board maybe can make some final decisions in January. So we'll have a clear path forward for those schools. And then shortly after that process, we'll start having that sort of 6th step in the process, which is, all right, we've taken care of opening the new schools. We've taken care of addressing situations where maybe capping is still necessary. Now, where do we still have challenges and issues that just weren't resolved by either of those, that either A, need to be considered for a future assignment plan, or B, maybe it's an underutilization concern. Do we still need multi-track year-round at this campus? Or maybe it's still an overcrowding at a track 4 school, and is it time to start thinking about multi-track? Those sorts of things. So all of those conversations will be queuing up in the next couple of months. Again, more information on all of those steps can be found on our assignment planning page. All right, we're getting close. I'm going to dive into the recommendations and we'll get to your questions, because I really want to spend as much time as possible on your questions this evening. So just as a reminder, if you joined us late, we're using the Q&A feature for Google Meets. So just use this information to post your questions for us. You're really looking for this guy right here to post your questions. Again, we're making sure they're anonymous and confidential. So once you see that your question has been removed, that means it has been captured by our moderators, and our host will help us address that later in the session. And again, we do have a separate new thought exchange open through November 3rd in relation to the release of the revised draft on October 15th. So let's talk about the adjustments. Again, these were all talked about at great length at the board table on October 15th. So if you want to hear a longer or more in-depth explanation, please feel free to watch that YouTube video. However, today we're going to jump into these 5 specific recommendations. So in the stability rules section, we're going to talk about Academy of Engineering and Academy of Information Technology students. For the new schools, we're going to talk about an adjustment to the attendance area for Pleasant Plains Elementary. For existing schools, we're going to talk about a reversion of an initial recommendation related to Carroll Middle. For calendar application changes, we're going to talk about an area where it was pointed out to us by the community that they didn't have a traditional calendar option, yet they were being assigned to a traditional calendar elementary. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. And then we also had some really nuanced, really precise information come from a handful of families about the callback process for those of you that are impacted by being at a base that's capped today, not knowing whether or not you might get a mid-year callback before you have to make a decision about stability transfers. So let's dive in. As far as the stability rules go, most of the original recommended stability rules from September 3rd are the same. So again, opening those new elementary schools, if a student is being recommended to be assigned into Bowling Road, Pleasant Plains, or Rex Road Elementary, and they're rising into 4th or 5th grade, they would be eligible for a stability transfer under this current set of recommended rules. In addition, if those rising 4th or 5th grade students had any younger siblings that would like to join them at their current school, they would also be eligible for those same stability transfers. I'm going to pause here because you may ask, how can a rising kindergartner be eligible for stability? They're not even registered yet. The good news is that the registration window has already opened. So if you do have rising kindergartners in your home that need to get pre-enrolled so they can get a student ID number, you can go ahead and do that now. And then that way, by the time we get to the stability transfer window, they'll already be attached to those older siblings and they'll be eligible to put in their stability transfer in December. If you can't get your registration done before December, not to worry, we can handle those during our March transfer period as well. The major change to the stability rules was at the high school level, specifically related to the opening of Felton Grove High School. Because Felton Grove will only serve ninth and 10th graders, all ninth and 10th graders that don't have older siblings attending, let's say Apex Friendship, or Holly Springs High School, they would be expected to go ahead and transfer over, be assigned to, and start with the opening of Felton Grove High School. It was brought to our attention that there are a handful of students who are rising 10th graders who might not have an older sibling at Apex Friendship or Apex High, but they're in one of these CTE or Career Technology Education Academies. So based on that information, we talked with staff about precedent and checked in with the board. And what it has happened historically is that these types of transfers were approved. We usually just waited until the normal transfer window or the official transfer window in March. Um, but with course scheduling for high schools, it was brought to our attention that if the students could already get their transfers approved in December and be on the rosters come January, it would make scheduling their courses for the coming school year so much easier. And so we talked and we figured out a way to do that. So we will be adding that small group of students into the eligible list for stability transfers at the high school level. Their younger siblings aren't explicitly included here, so they would need to put in a request during the regular hardship transfer window if they want to join their rising 10th grade sibling, and the board would take that under advisement. We didn't make any recommendations at the other levels because they already were as generous as they could be. So if it's an existing school to an existing school in this plan, we have maybe a Holly Ridge to a Herbert Akins or a Holly Springs to a Holly Ridge. In the Apex area, there's some Olive Chapel to Bockham or some Salem to Bockham kind of recommendations. Because those are all existing school to existing school moves, we're recommending all rising kindergarten through 5th grade students be able to go. So those rising kindergartners, again, would need to go ahead and get pre-enrolled now so that they could then be eligible for those transfers during December. If not, we can handle those in the March time period. Middle school, again, no recommended changes. Any student impacted by any of the handful of middle school recommendations that are included in this year's plan would be eligible to stay if they're already attending the school. And the same thing goes for any existing high school to existing high school moves. I think there's only one. There's a small area being recommended to go from Apex Friendship to Apex High, and all of those students would be allowed to stay at Apex Friendship if they could provide their own transportation. All right, so that's it for the stability rules. It was that one change really at the high school level specific to those academy students at Apex Friendship and Apex High. Related to the opening of new schools, there was one elementary school that we made a recommended revision to the attendance area for, and that's Pleasant Plains Elementary. As a reminder, it's located over here in the sort of apex area of the county. Um, the original presentation in September shared that we were looking to relieve crowding and or pre-relieve crowding at a handful of schools, specifically Apex, Apex Friendship, and Scotts Ridge, and that because of a cascading or domino impact, Olive Chapel would also be impacted and relieved. As a reminder, these are the projected crowding rates for the schools if we were to do nothing and just leave the assignment areas as is. As you can see, these are untenable numbers for most of these schools. So the original recommendation in September had the area that you see highlighted in yellow here being the proposed attendance area for Pleasant Plains. And that original proposal reflected a, a decent balance across the schools. Obviously, we still have significant crowding concerns at Apex Friendship Elementary and Olive Chapel, but at least it does help to reduce some of the pressure on both of those schools. In addition, it did significantly, project a potential significant reduction for Scotts Ridge and a decent opening for Pleasant Plains. Based on feedback from the community, what we realized during our early engagement sessions, we were hearing from those families that live in relatively large subdivisions where it's next to impossible to have the entire subdivision attend a single elementary school. It has to be divided and attend at least two elementary schools. There were concerns that in some cases they were attending three elementary schools. And during those feedback sessions, we talked with the board, we talked with our planners and our planning team, and the goal was wherever possible to reduce that impact. And so if there is a relatively large subdivision that simply can't fit into one elementary school, could we at least get it to where it's only going to two elementary schools? That was the intent. When we released the initial draft of Pleasant Plains, the first recommendation had a relatively undeveloped. It's developing now. You may be familiar with it. It's called Depot 499, a new subdivision remaining assigned to Scotts Ridge, as some of the students are attending Scotts Ridge now, and then doing some shuffling that inadvertently left the Bella Costa subdivision continuing to be divided into three schools. And not only did it continue to divide them into three schools, it also shifted schools for two areas of the for that. So it was like a bit of a shell game, and I hate there's really no better way to explain it. Based on community feedback and analysis by the planning team, it was realized that we could make a recommended revision that would support our ideal of trying to maybe reduce that division down to just two divisions instead of three for that one particular subdivision, as well as to take a newer growing development and assign it to the new elementary school. We've heard that a lot from the community. Can you take newer subdivisions and have them go to the new schools so it creates less of a stability or destabilization for families that are already in neighborhoods? And so that was one that the planning team felt would be supported. So what you're seeing here is that recommendation where this changed just a little bit, and essentially what it did was allow one portion of Bella Casa to remain unchanged and stay at Scotts Ridge. There's another portion of Bella Casa that's still recommended for a change to come from Olive Chapel to Scotts Ridge. And then there's a portion that wasn't impacted in the original draft and remains unimpacted. That's part of Apex Friendship. We don't really assign by neighborhood, but it was just this community feedback, this idea that can you at least get us down to two schools instead of three? And that was one that the planning team felt long term would be a good solution. And so what you can see here is it has a little bit of a less impact on Scotch Ridge. It does have Pleasant Plains opening with a lower enrollment. However, with some of the areas that have been assigned to the school that are growing, we do feel it will feel confident. It will fill at a gradual rate. And so I'll pause here and just talk about another piece of feedback that maybe is not realized by the community that has been taken into consideration. Historically, in an effort to make sure that our new elementary schools had a sufficient number of students to be able to offer all the academic programming, there was a concerted effort to make sure we took enough existing neighborhoods and assigned those into the schools so that there'd be enough students that first year to get a decent number of students for allotment purposes. You may or may not be familiar, but students are tied to funding in terms of X number of students equals a teacher type concept. However, when we did that in high growth areas, within 1, 2, or 3 years, those schools would be so full that they either needed a cap or needed to have a reassignment or a calendar change. So Apex Friendship is a perfect example. It was opened in August of 22, and by February of 23, it was being recommended for an enrollment cap because we had too many existing neighborhoods assigned to it, while there was also very large areas of undeveloped land that were going to be developed. So the growth for that particular school has really just been sort of awesome in terms of numbers perspective. So, learning from that and hearing from the community, we are trying a slightly new approach. The first school that we did that with was Woods Creek, the one that we opened this year, where it started with a little bit lower enrollment in the first year because we did a more blended mix of existing neighborhoods and new neighborhoods to allow the school to gradually fill. And so, Pleasant Plains will be another example of that. And so that was the only new school attendance area recommendation that was made. I will pause and say that there was conversation at the table related to the calendar for Bowling Road Elementary. Based on that discussion that we had with the board, we have added one more information session next week to talk specifically about that topic. So if you're from that area and would be interested to learn more, we would encourage you to join us next week. The other removal that we have in the plan is after some feedback from the community that was really imbalanced. There was a little bit for, a little bit against. It was about a 50-50 outcome. There wasn't a lot of community support for this particular recommendation to go from Carroll to Leesville Middle. And since the recommendation was not being made to relieve crowding at either of the two schools, we're going to recommend removing it at this time and then having a continuing conversation with the community to come up with a more comprehensive plan long term. Calendar application adjustments. So you may be familiar that in the area related to Olive Chapel, there's a portion of the attendance area that's slightly closer to Bauckham than anyone else. Like it's definitely closest to Olive Chapel Elementary. In fact, it's walkable. Um, However, our district doesn't define it as a no transport zone from a bus safety perspective. So we do still provide bus transportation to those neighborhoods, but families may choose to walk their children to school. And that is fine. Obviously, as a parent, you can do that. But we as a district wouldn't identify it as a no transportation zone or a walk zone. Is probably more common language that the community would use. So, in order to relieve Olive Chapel, the next closest school that has available capacity is the newly renovated Bauckham Elementary. And so, the recommendation is to take advantage of that new capacity, relieve Olive Chapel. Yet, because it's Olive Chapel to Bauckham and they're both open and existing schools, any students that are already attending Olive Chapel would be eligible to stay under those stability rules at Olive Chapel until they finish the fifth grade. And then the new families or families that would like the traditional calendar or would like the transportation could go to Bauckham. The challenge was that we thought that that area also had Middle School as a traditional calendar option, so that if the families chose to take the assignment to Bauckham, they could also then ask for that traditional calendar at Apex to get K-8 calendar alignment. And that isn't there. So we wanted to make sure we added that in. And so that's part of what the recommendation was here. This is a short term solution to get us through the 25-26 school year. And throughout the spring and summer, we'll be coming back to the board with a long-term set of recommendations related to middle schools in this area that will give a permanent solution. Ideally, making this the base assignment for the area, making Apex Middle the base assignment for the area. But we'll have to have longer conversations with the community about that because there's already been some discussions about feeder pattern alignment and such. So the recommendation here is just to make sure that those families would have access to Apex Middle as a traditional calendar option with transportation for 25-26, so that if their students needed that traditional K-8 calendar alignment, they could have that. In addition, because Lufkin would remain the base middle school for the area, any families opting to stay at Olive Chapel would still be able to access that transportation to Lufkin and keep their kids on a multi-track year-round calendar K-8 if that was what was better for those families. All right. And then another thing I talked about was the capping of schools. This is a nuance. There's not a lot of families this is going to impact, but it is an impact. And so we wanted to make sure we addressed it. In some situations, a student has been capped out of an elementary school, and we have a process called mid-year callbacks, which usually happens in late December, so that families who have like a seats come open at one of these capped elementary schools, they can come transfer in at the semester break and take advantage of the seat that's now become available. we had families concerned that they wouldn't know the outcome of those mid-year callbacks in time enough to make a decision about their stability transfer. And so we did agree that we'll work with those particular schools that are impacted by the plan and those particular families to make sure they know for sure whether or not they're going to have a mid-year callback, so they know which stability transfer they're asking for. Are they asking to stay at their current overflow school, or is there a chance they might get called back and be able to stay at their current base school? So that's a change here that you're seeing happening in late November. Normally that doesn't happen until December. And so those are the major recommendations, or the recommendations that were included to revise the original draft. Again, all of this information is on our enrollment proposal site. And I know I've seen the Q&A chart kind of going off, so it looks like we'll probably have several questions. So I'm going to turn things over to, am I turning things over to Lewis? Or am I a little early?
No, you're ready to go if you want
Okay.
to just.
Yeah, I think everyone on the call is probably familiar with the timeline, so I'll zip through that. I won't talk about them, but just as a reminder, this is where we are in the planning process. Here's what's happening next from a public engagement standpoint. Continue to visit our websites. Obviously, I'm very excited about having these resources available for our families. So I'm going to take a sip of water, and Lewis is going to help guide us through our Q&A section.
Okay, and just a reminder, folks, please continue to post questions to the Q&A and contribute to the thought exchange. When Ms. Pulliam comes back, I will ask her to show you where the thought exchange is again, because we did have a couple of questions about where the thought exchange is located. So we will do that. I know we have reviewed a lot of information tonight, and we want to address as many of your questions as we can. So once again, please take a few minutes if you have not already done so, and post any questions or comments using the QA feature. And as you're posting questions, we're going to continue to review them, and we're going to start by looking at some of those questions that have already been submitted. So in just one moment, Ms. Pulliam is going to come back, show you where the thought exchange is, and then I will begin asking questions, and Ms. Susan Pulliam will begin answering them, okay?
I did highlight that for you. Here's the link to the thought exchange. What may not be evident is based on feedback from previous enrollment plans, like last year's enrollment plan, as we transitioned from that initial draft in September to the updated draft in October, we got a lot of feedback saying, hey, why are you doing the same type of thought exchange? You already know what's important to us. You've already gotten us to post comments and rate them. Why are we doing this exercise again? And we thought that was a really valid concern. And so what we're using is a slightly different version of the thought exchange, where it gives you the opportunity to provide a longer response, because we also received feedback this year that the current version of the thought exchange, because it's designed to be a discussion tool to allow you to see people's thoughts and ideas and rate them, it does have a character limit, to give you more opportunities to provide a more expanded and more detailed explanation of your concerns. We do have a handful of families that are trying to email board members, and while that can be helpful, it's not equitable for all of our families across the district. And so this will create that tool where we can capture all of those ideas in one spot, and we will do a summary report of what we're hearing and learning from this updated thought exchange. And we'll share that with the board prior to their public hearing. All right.
Okay, thank you, Susan. So we have some categories that we're going to go through tonight. The first one we would like to start with is stability, some questions regarding stability. So first off, Susan, can you apply for a stability transfer for a child if you are a staff member and they have attended a school that is not assigned to them? For example, if my child attends the school because I work there, can they continue under the stability transfer even if I move positions or retire?
So there's a lot of layers to that question.
So I think what they're saying is
we'll start with, we'll piece it together one by one. If you're an active teacher or staff member at a particular school and your student already has an employee transfer to that school, that's a transfer that's valid through the 5th grade. So unless you decide to go to a different elementary school and take that student with you, as a way of an example, that would be a valid transfer through the 5th grade. Those don't have to be done annually. The only exception is if you're an out-of-county employee, and if you have those types of questions, please contact our office directly and we'll help walk you through that process. If your student has that eligible transfer, it's valid through the 5th grade unless you ask for something different. So employees on employee transfers generally should be fine. If you are really, really concerned, please reach out to the student assignment officer. Your data manager will know who that is for your school, and they'll make sure they help you with that process. Or if you want to give us your information, since it is confidential, one of our staff members can grab it tonight and reach out to you.
Thank you, Susan. Have we considered allowing 10th graders to stay at Apex Friendship given the impact on academics, friendships, extracurriculars? Living in 12 Oaks, proximity to Felton Grove is not ideal, especially with the heavy traffic. Have we considered that?
Yes, and if you'll, there's a really detailed response about that, so I don't know that I'm trying to see if I can get to it. Um, yes, there's been a lot of consideration over the years. At one point, there was a consideration of opening high schools with just ninth grade, and that's just not feasible in terms of being able to offer high quality academic programming across the entire campus. And candidly, if you only have ninth graders at the school, it makes it really hard to field athletic teams. It makes it hard to build extracurricular activities. It also makes it hard to really build that community and culture for your school because you've only got one grade level of student. It's just not good practice. I'm trying to find the slide. Well, I won't dig through it, but if you're looking for that information, we do have a really detailed explanation of that particular rationale for you as to why the district really is concerned about opening a school with just ninth grade. So what we'll tell you is that if they're not eligible under the stability transfer rules on their own merits, because they've got an older sibling or in one of those academy programs, you're more than welcome to put in a request during the March transfer period explaining your unique individual concerns and your hardship concerns related to why you're wanting that transfer. Just know that our staff per policy won't be able to approve those because it goes against the assignment plan, but you will be able to appeal that to the board and you can have the board weigh in and see if they feel like your reason is compelling. So I don't want to give you false hope, but I also want to make sure you understand what your choices are, what your options are.
Thank you, Susan.
Mhm.
So, Susan, I think this is two-pronged. They're asking, when can we request a transfer request to Apex High School? And of course, that has to do whether or not it's a stability request or a request for school transfer.
Yeah. And Lewis, if you can help me make sure I've got the dates right. So the stability transfer, if you're eligible for stability, we're right now targeting opening that on December 4th, but that's all contingent on everything working perfect. There's a lot of mechanics that have to happen behind the scenes as we update student information. The
Right.
regular transfer period, Lewis, is in March. I believe it's March 4th that it
March 4th
opens.
through the 15th
Okay.
is what we're targeting that, yes.
Yes.
And the stability is obviously tentative. We are working towards the dates you mentioned.
Yeah. And since you specifically mentioned Apex, that's when you would do it. Just as a quick public service announcement, if you're interested in any of our magnet schools, that application is already open and you can actively participate in that process now. And the early colleges, it's really important that you get a jump on those because those close a little bit earlier. They close in December.
Thank you, Susan. So we're concerned because we're a family that have two kids in two different school calendars. We're two working parents, two kids on two different calendars. How can you support us in that? What can we do to try to align those calendars?
Yeah, so we've heard a lot of feedback like this, and I'm just going to be open and honest with you with the K-3 class size legislation. You may or may not be familiar with, but about 10 or so years ago, the state legislature legislated that kindergarten through third grade could have a capacity maximum. So kindergarten can have 18 students, first grade 16, second and third grade 17. There are a handful of situations where a waiver could be requested and the number might be a little higher. So your personal child might be particularly in a CAP school, might be in a slightly larger classroom. But that class size legislation really limits how many elementary students we can put into a particular building and still meet those requirements and then be eligible for our state funding. So as a result, we've had to open and operate more and more of our elementary schools on a multi-track year-round calendar to account for those capacity needs. The class size rules aren't as tight or as stringent as the students get to fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and all the way up through 12th grade. So we're able to be a little bit more flexible and make some adjustments at that area. So it is not uncommon for an area to have a assignment at a multi-track year-round elementary school and a traditional middle school. So for those of you who didn't maybe understand the nature of that question, that's probably where that's coming from. And so as a district, what we've tried to do is say, if you're interested in having K-8 calendar alignment versus maybe 6-12, we also have a lot of families that find that once they get to middle school, having that age forward being on traditional actually works really well for other purposes. So whichever works for your family. If you're interested in a multi-track year-round middle school, there may or may not be one that has transportation in your area, but you're always welcome to apply. In the Western region, schools like Holly Grove and Lufkin usually have some seats. Salem usually has some seats. If you're going out toward Fuquay Arena, Westlake usually has some seats. I know that's not really Fuquay, I'll be candid, but that one usually has some seats. So just be thoughtful about the schools that you're asking for. And Lewis, you can probably remind us, where is it families can look for information on about whether or not a school is open to transfers when it comes time to ask for those?
Yes, students, so that'll be on the student assignment website. When you click on request a school transfer, there will be a link there that the families can click on, and it'll give them a list of open schools. So right before they request a transfer request, that information will be available via a link posted on our website.
So if you can find a multi-track year-round middle school that you can provide transportation to, or get a carpool together for, or that maybe comes with transportation for your address, that would be our best recommendation for you to ask for one of those.
Okay, thank you, Susan. So Susan, if I'm coming from one multi-year track school, I'm going to another multi-track school, how do I maintain the same track? I just wanted you to address that.
Yeah, great question. We're actively working to hire our principals. That's another improvement that the district has made over the last several years, is they're actively working to get those elementary principals onboarded sooner. So we might even have recommendations going as early as November 26th so that we can name the principals for these new schools. As soon as they're hired, they will actively start working with our team and the data managers for the schools that will be feeding students into their campuses to collect that track information. And they absolutely work their hardest to keep you on a track you're already on, to give you that stability, unless you're specifically asking for a track change. So they will work to try to maintain that track for you first as sort of an assumptive start point, and then they'll start reaching out to families directly to see if they are interested in a track change. And then for those that maybe are coming from a traditional school or are brand new kindergartners, get information from them to try to figure out how to place them on tracks. So that new principal will be your best point of contact when time comes, and they will be actively reaching out to the families that are assigned to their school to help them navigate that track assignment process. I will caution that because we're using that new strategy, for those of you that have been in the call the whole time, we're using that new strategy where we're not opening our schools completely full. We're opening them sort of half full and letting them gradually fill. Usually fourth and fifth grade will have limited tracks, maybe like tracks 1 and 4. So just kind of keep that in mind as well, that might be a restriction for those principals as they're building their tracks for that first year.
And Susan, just you addressed this already, but just this, it's important for folks to understand if a student's granted a stability or hardship transfer, two different things, but a stability or hardship, is that valid through the exit grade?
Yes.
Okay.
The only reason that the transfer would become invalid is if you move out of district, literally out of Wake County, because then you're going to have to withdraw and go to school in a different district. Or if you put in an application asking for something different, your family has changed situations and something else would be better for you. So maybe you put in a magnet application and you get selected for a magnet seat, or you put in a new transfer asking for something different because circumstances have changed for you. But once you have a transfer, those are valid through the 5th, 8th, or 12th grade. I saw a hand pop up. Just as a friendly reminder, if you're just joining us, please post all your questions using our Q&A feature, and our moderators are helping us to make sure we address all of those. It's quite possible some of you have asked the same questions, so we're really trying to make sure we're answering all those unique and individual questions.
Susan, I now want to pivot to planning process assignment questions, as we have a few of those. How can we get our suggested revision to be considered before the official vote is conducted?
Sure. So I would like to start by saying absolutely every comment or concern or suggestion that has been received is being considered and reviewed and evaluated. Whether or not it can be acted upon, whether or not from a staff perspective, thinking about long range planning and being good stewards of taxpayer resources, we feel like we can recommend to the board that we make that requested change. That's sort of a different element. So if you have a concern or a suggestion that you don't feel like has been actually reviewed or assessed because it's new or different from feedback we've already received, please continue to submit those to us. We'll absolutely review those. If you're trying to reiterate your particular perspective, the best method for that would probably be to go ahead and put something in this updated thought exchange, because it's a larger text box, so you can put more details and more information in it. As I said, we'll give that summary report to the board, and then the board will host their public hearing on November 12th. You're always welcome to sign up to speak at the public hearing and share your concerns with them there. And then the board will direct staff if they feel like additional changes need to be made in addition to what staff has recommended. And so really you want to get it to them on or before November 12th so that they can give that final feedback to us as we develop that final draft based on that feedback for the 26th presentation.
Susan, who will vote? Who are the individuals that actually vote on the proposal?
That's the board members themselves. So we continually present everything to the board. So it's all 9 sitting members of the board.
Okay, thank you. And Susan, as far as the team is concerned, who writes the enrollment proposals? Who's
Sure.
part of that team?
Yeah. So the planning team is really multifaceted. There are members from our facilities design and construction team, which is a large group. There's members from our real estate services, long range planning, geospatial analytics, our communications team, our magnet programs team. I'm going to miss somebody. Academics has been involved and athletics has been involved. Um, and of course, the workload in terms of taking all of that feedback and all that information, presenting it falls to the Office of Student Assignment.
And Susan, what will happen if the board does not approve this proposal?
Historically, that has not happened, so I'm hoping we're not voting. We're not speaking that into existence. If the board makes any delays, then that just delays final decisions into probably January or February, which is really detrimental to families because then they don't know for sure what their assignments are. If they don't approve the plan, we wouldn't have an assignment area for all of the 4 new schools. That would be in my that would be concerning from our perspective because we'd have 4 schools that are set to open that won't have student populations assigned to them. The other changes are probably less concerning, but for those 4 schools, it would be a very significant impact to not have attendance areas for those schools.
Okay. And last year's student assignment changes, there was really only one change after the initial draft last year. So, I mean, are you taking our concerns seriously? I mean, will there obviously
Yeah.
be changes if they're merited?
Yeah, to answer that, absolutely. Please know we start from a position of heart. We understand that every recommendation we're making is going to impact students, and then extrapolate that out to their families. I hear very clearly, our staff hears very clearly concerns about schedules, practical concerns that are maybe not related to our capital improvement plan. I get that there's a bit of a tension sometimes between the need to operate our schools efficiently and be good stewards of those taxpayer resources, make sure that we have schools that are actively full and teaching students, and stability for your family and calendar continuity for your family and program continuity for your family. And sometimes those match up and it works out perfectly. And sometimes there is a somewhat healthy tension between those 2 ideals. And so, yes, absolutely. Everything is reviewed, considered, weighed, measured. If you maybe have not been plugged into previous years, our dedication to really fully responding to the concerns we're receiving has been increased by orders of magnitude. If you'll look at a similar presentation that was made in October of last year, there wasn't nearly the level of detail in the response. We heard very clearly how concerning some of the recommendations are for individual families. And we wanted to make sure you had all of the information as to why we were or were not planning adjustments based on that feedback. We get it. We get that change is significant for families. Yet we must operate a system of 199, soon to be 204 schools that serves over 160,000 students, and we've got to do that efficiently and effectively. And so that requires some change at some level on occasion. Staff's goal over the last 2 years has been to bring proposals that have long-standing tenure, meaning we're really thinking about that 10-year outlook so that recommendations we make today can hold and be stable moving forward versus having to come back in 3 years and make yet another adjustment because we hear very clearly 3 years is too frequent, even though it's less frequent than once a year, which was terrible, every year, which was probably terrible. 3 years is still a little narrow, right? You could technically be in 2 schools during that time period and not be eligible for a stability transfer. So we do understand that, and we're going to work to try to push that even further and further apart so that the frequency of changes are much reduced.
Thank you, Susan. So because year round always has a track out, we have, approximately 25% more capacity. Do we
Yes.
start at a capacity at 125%, considering that completely full, if all 4 tracks are in, it'd be 125. Is that the way it's considered?
Okay.
Is that how we factor it?
Great question. Actually, once a school is designed or determined that it's going to be multi-track, we adjust its capacity to reflect that. So, if by way of example, this year's round of schools are somewhere in the 920 to 936, I'm going to miss the number, but a little over 900 students can fit in the schools if they're multi-track. If they were reduced to traditional, we would adjust the capacity to 716. So we reflect that additional capacity in the stated capacity value when we're doing those crowding reports. So we incorporate it and we adjust it based on the actual operating calendar of the school.
Okay, Susan, we're going to move on to safety, transportation, and community logistics.
Sure.
And we know another department handles this, but can we work to limit bus rides for all students so they're less than 30 minutes? Is there a more efficient way to do it than having kids on a bus more than an hour a day?
Yes, they were correct. That's not our department. So I can speak on behalf of our transportation department only in the sense of what they've shared with us. They're working really diligently as new drivers are discovered and onboarded and sustained in our staff. They're working to cover those uncovered routes. And then once we get every single route fully covered, and I think we're almost there, if not there. So you might want to check with a recent, I think the department reports to the facilities committee. So that would be where the most up to date reports are um, of the board, that is. So it's my understanding that once we can get all of our existing routes fully covered, fully staffed, where we're not having to rely on substitutes, then we can start looking to decrease run times where possible for students so that we can maybe have more expedited routes. But we're still going uphill on that one. But yeah, that would definitely be a question for our transportation department or the facilities committee. And I can share that question with them and see if we can get some response that we can put to our website. But that is outside of my area, and I really can't speak to the models that they use for creating those routes.
Okay, Susan, let's move on to school and more neighborhood specific questions as there is a lot of energy around those. So during last week's Board of Education session, it was said that part of Olive Chapel Road's crossing, basically the bridge over 540, was unsafe. We've sent in a video. We've tried to show you that it's not an unsafe passage. Can you tell us why that portion or that walkway is not considered a walk zone or could
Yeah.
be, so we can continue to
Yeah.
stay at OCE?
Again, this is a transportation department question because they determine which areas are no transportation zones based on several factors, some of which are legislated and some of which are policy driven based on our own district's policies. But in conversations about that specific question, it was just shared with me that based on the current condition of the road and the current condition of the sidewalk, while it certainly is sufficient for a parent to walk with their child across, it's not something that the district would ever consider a no transport zone, and we would always provide bus service for that. So and that's sort of all I have on that because that comes from the transportation department. We can double check and see if they can give us a more explicit response that we can post onto our website, and so we'll work on that.
And one more question related to this, Susan. Has the planning team considered the Greenway as a walkway to OCE from those two communities?
Again, a transportation question, but it's my understanding that greenways inherently can't be considered no transport zones because of lighting concerns and other things. So again, these are questions that we probably need to direct to our transportation department and see if they can help us respond to them. And then I'll work with communications to get responses posted to our website.
All right, thank you, Susan. A couple more questions related to this particular area neighborhood. There is a neighborhood in the Cary area that is zoned for OCE. So have we made any considerations about moving them out of OCE and considering other communities?
And Lewis and I are using a term OCE as if everyone knows who that is. Those on the call may not know, they're referring to Olive Chapel Elementary.
Thank you, Susan.
There, throughout the district, based on our historical assignment patterns, longstanding practices related to achieving those student achievement balances, those socioeconomic balances, and diversity within our schools. We have what we call satellite attendance areas for many of our schools. And so I think what they're referring to is one of those pre-existing satellite attendance areas. And we do evaluate those every single year, but in conjunction with our board policy, we have to determine is there another school that those students could go to that's even closer, that has sufficient capacity and would meet all the other pillars. That's not always the case. We are being tasked by our board to continuously review those areas. This year in particular, our focus has been on the opening of the new schools. So as we get into years where we have less new schools, when there's maybe only one new school opening or perhaps no new schools opening, we have a little bit more flexibility to address some of those areas. We just need to make sure that we're creating stable assignment patterns for those students as well. And so right now, that's not in the recommendations to change the attendance area for that school, but it is something that we will continue to monitor for many of our schools throughout the district over the next several years.
Okay. Excuse me. And Susan, moving the neighborhoods of Ashley Downs and Pearson Farm, is that going to make a significant difference to the cap?
So we're talking about Olive Chapel Elementary again.
Correct.
Really at this point, the recommendations that we're making are doing the best effort we can with the available capacity that we have near the school to start to address its long-standing cap. If you all had looked at the percentages or recall those from earlier, there it is one of our most overcrowded elementary schools, if not the most overcrowded elementary school in the district. And at this time, some of you may be aware there is a land bank site. The district has gone ahead and partnered with the county to come up with a property that's closer to the sort of the Chatham County line. Unfortunately, it is nowhere near ready for development. It has no water, no sewer, no electric, and there's no plans to get that connected anytime soon. So as soon as that land is available and there are funds in the capital improvement plan, I'm sure that that site will eventually be prioritized, but it won't be prioritized probably in the next 7 to 10 years, just because of the readiness of the site. Um, so we can't rely on that to resolve the issues at Olive Chapel. So these two individual neighborhoods by themselves, probably, any one move isn't going to be significant to relieve any particular school, but the combined effect of these neighborhoods and the area that's going to be going from Olive Chapel to Scotts Ridge, the combined effect of all of that does reduce the pressure on Olive Chapel and complementarily takes advantage of the newly available capacity at Balcom Elementary, which was designed specifically to start relieving some of our capped and crowded schools in the region. The reason we wanted to expand capacity at that school during the renovation. You may recall it was originally a capacity of 508 and now it's 716. So that really gave us some significant wiggle room to be able to relieve some other schools that are either capped, crowded, or are in high growth areas.
Thank you, Susan. Moving on to the Woodbury community in Apex as well.
Mhm.
Have we considered, or has our neighborhood been moved 3 times, or have we been moved multiple times in less than 3 years? Because we feel that it
Yeah.
has.
And I will say this particular area, they're currently in the Apex Friendship Elementary base. If I'm getting this,
Correct.
yeah, yes, that's the one that's in Apex. The area was assigned into Apex Friendship Elementary when it opened in 22-23 school year. So 22-23, 23-24, and then currently 24-25. So yes, at the end of this year, that'll be that 3-year period. So going into 25-26, this is one of those areas we tried to avoid it. Um, but we're making a recommendation in that 3-year window, right? So that for that 4th year, they would go to a new school. So the address has only been assigned to Apex Friendship. Those addresses have only been assigned to Apex Friendship for its first 3 years. However, the complicating factor for some areas that are assigned to schools like Apex Friendship and Scotts Ridge is they were also overflowed to Balcom if they moved in more recently and couldn't fit into those schools. And then Balcom, because of the renovation, was located at the Woods Creek Elementary site for a period of time while the renovation was completing. So it's possible there are a handful of families that this will impact. It's possible that a student was living in that area, sent to the overflow at the Balcom site, then moved to the renovation or the Woods Creek swing space site, and then called back to attend Apex Friendship. And they might just be a third grader. So yes, these are, or excuse me, a second grader. So there are a handful of families in the situation. We're keenly aware of this possibility. We've been working really carefully to identify across the district who all this might have happened to, so that we can be prepared to support those families. Unfortunately, we can't include them in the stability transfer rules, but we would encourage those families, if they're interested, to participate in that March 4th to 15th transfer period so we can help them. But it's not a, there are a handful of families that will have impacted, yes. But the assignment itself has only been changed once.
Thank you, Susan.
Mhm.
So, Susan, at the last virtual information session, it was heavily implied that Parkside Middle School would impact the Pearson Farms, Ashley Downs communities and likely fix their calendar misalignment. With Parkside not opening until 2028 proposed, why can't small communities stay where they are until all the alignment is fixed?
And I do believe that was a, I'm not sure if I didn't communicate it accurately or as we were responding to those questions, I think it's a misunderstanding of what was intended to be stated. What was intended to be stated was that originally we weren't going to make any middle school recommendations from the Morrisville area all the way down to Apex in this plan, because when the planning process started, Parkside Middle was still on schedule to open in 26-27. And we knew there would be a lot of domino and cascading impacts with the opening of that school as we look to relieve crowding at schools like Alston Ridge, Mills Park, take advantage of Davis, Salem, Apex, etc. So we weren't able to pivot super quickly when there was that last minute decision, not last minute, but a late summer decision to change the schedule for that particular school to advance Morrisville High School. So what we've been communicating, what we've been trying to communicate and share with the board is that the plan is, since we couldn't address that this year with the recommendations that are coming in, we have a 1-year solution that says we'll get families calendar alignment at the appropriate schools. And then when we come back in 26, 27, we'll still, even despite the fact that Parkside Middle has been delayed, we do need to come up with some recommendations to relieve schools like Mills Park and take better advantage of schools like Davis, Salem, Apex, etc. But we need the board to give us some clear direction on how they're going to handle some of the ongoing capped and crowding concerns in elementary schools in that region. And so, because of the feeder pattern alignment discussions, we really just thought it made the most sense to be most supportive and most stable for families to hold off on making any middle school recommendations till 26, 27. But we will come with some very specific recommendations in 26, 27 for this area. So, right now, the 1-year solution is to get that Apex calendar option, Apex Middle calendar option. So, if families want to go to Bockham and go to Apex Middle, we can do that. And we're trying to work on the way we're responding to that question. If you're seeking K-8 calendar alignment related to this particular move, we will work with your family to get that for you, either at Bockham Apex or Olive Chapel Lufkin. And then going into 26, 27, we're going to come out and have some community engagement and talk with the families in this area about what a better long-term solution looks like. Make sure we think about feeder patterns, because again, we're hearing concerns about the high school feeders and all of that. Let's get a full scope before we just really quickly make a knee-jerk decision. And so that's where we're at. Make a better long-range planning recommendation.
Thank you, Susan. So one more question related to this. So Jordan Point being proximate to where Woodbury is, did the planning team consider reassigning parts of Jordan Point as opposed to Woodbury?
I believe both are impacted. Jordan Point is currently assigned to Scotts Ridge Elementary, if I'm correct. And so that is being recommended to go to Pleasant Plains as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Susan.
Mhm.
And another question. So if the proposal goes through and Woodbury is assigned to Pleasant Plains, have we considered offering a calendar application option for this area?
Yeah. So thinking back to the conversations or the explanations we've been talking about the stability transfers not coming with transportation, adding additional transportation for calendar options is just something that we can't sustain at this point. We do have a really lengthy response to that in the information that was shared with the board on October 15th, as well as on our website. So I won't sort of belabor the point too much for those of you that really want to read into those details, but we just don't have sufficient drivers to cover additional routes. So adding additional routes where 2 buses will be coming into the same neighborhood to take students to year round and traditional when it's not already happening is something we can't cover. We just don't have the drivers to cover adding additional routes to the transportation network. What we can do, however, is say families that are interested in an opposite calendar, you're certainly welcome. Obviously, our magnet, as I mentioned, our magnet application process is open now. Most of our magnet schools, close to all of them, operate on a traditional calendar. So if that excellent academic programming and that calendar and where they're located works for your family because of your work environment or other obligations that you have as a family, that's something we would happily encourage you to consider. In addition, if you wanted to ask for a traditional calendar seat at a different elementary school, similar to what we talked about with the year-round at the middle school match to an earlier question, we would encourage families to use the regular transfer process, but just make sure you're looking at that list that Lewis Point talked about. It's on the request for transfer page.
Yes, when
Yeah.
you ask for a change of school, that link will be populated on the right-hand side of the screen, and you can check that list.
And that list will give you an idea of how crowded the school is. So I would highly discourage you from asking for a school that's capped, because if the neighborhood kids can't go there, we certainly can't approve transfers in. And I would highly discourage you from requesting a school that's listed as close to transfer, because it may not be capped, but it is crowded. And I would look for ones that maybe say open to transfer.
All right. Thank you, Susan.
Mhm.
So moving on. So We have heard that Pleasant Plains might not be ready until August. How will that impact students scheduled to attend there? What happens if it opens later than expected?
I'll check with our facilities team, but I talked with them right before our presentation on October 15th, and it was confirmed that all the schools would be ready on the current schedule. If that changes, we as a district will pivot as best we can. But right now, all the information we have is that everything will be ready to operate on time. But I will definitely take that concern to our facilities design team and see if there's any new information that needs to be shared with the public.
Okay, thank you. And Susan,
And
can
let me
you-
pause real quick. If you go to our assignment planning page, I can't remember where that slide was. I'll just go here. I know we're not done. I'm not trying to rush it. If you'll go to this page, there's a link to the capital improvement planning page that also is cross-linked to facilities design and construction. So any information that's publicly available about the design and construction schedules, you've got a cross-link from that assignment planning page if you're keenly interested in facility stuff. I try to know as much as I can, but it is a little bit outside my scope. It's not part of my daily work. So it is hard for me to keep on every schedule and every contract that's been approved. That's something that's a little outside my scope, but that is all available on their website, which is linked from our website.
Okay. Susan, can you address why or if any changes have been made to the Bella Costa neighborhood? And it seems like they have not been as reassigned as some of the other neighborhoods. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what we mean by as reassigned, but the Bella Casa neighborhood has at least one reassignment in this plan. It's a large subdivision that was currently assigned to 3 different schools. So there is a recommended change for at least one portion of that school at this time. But historically, I think they've been moved a couple of times because Apex Friendship Elementary has only been open for 3 years, and there's a portion that's in that base area. So they have had reassignments because they're in a high growth area. And Scotts Ridge is relatively new. And I say that I have some digital records that go back to 1998. I have paper records that obviously go back to 1976. But this area, because it's so high growth, and Scotts Ridge has opened, and Pleasant Plains has opened, and Apex Friendship has opened, and now Woods Creek has opened, this region of the county has had a significant number of reassignments over the last several years as all those schools have opened.
Okay. Thank you, Susan.
Mm-hmm.
Pivoting to another neighborhood now in the Holly Springs area, when will we be making, if ever, a decision about Stonemont High School zoning? We're wondering
we got a lot of feedback late in the process about the high school change. There was some small concerns about the Rex Road adjustment. Right now, we're looking to relieve crowding at Holly Springs High School with the opening of Felton Grove High School, and there will be a significant number of siblings that are eligible for stability transfers. So for the first year of Felton Grove, we were not looking to make any additional adjustments to Holly Springs as it's currently operating at or above 100% crowding with a good comportment of trailers. Over the next several years, we'll continue to monitor this region, both for Felton Grove, Holly Springs, Middle Creek, Apex Friendship, Apex High, to see if any additional adjustments will be needed in the next couple of years. So right now, the staff is just not looking to add any students to Holly Springs because we are concerned about relieving the current crowding issues at the school.
Okay. And Susan, 1 or 2 more questions because we are approaching 7:30.
Oh, yes.
So there's a small portion of Jordan Manors that got divided. Did we consider the size of Jordan Manors and possibly not reassigning them if possible?
Jordan Manors.
And Jordan Manors is...
I'll say thank you to that guest for naming that subdivision. We'll look into that. That's not one that bubbled up in the original thought exchange or public engagement conversations. So we'll take
It's
a
in
look
New
at
Hill, but we'll take a look at that, Susan.
Okay. If it's near Jordan Point, I don't know. We'll take a look at it and we'll get a response on the FAQ portion of the site.
Okay, thank you. And Susan, last question.
And we'll do the same for the Stonemont High School, because again, that one came in after all materials had been published for the October 15th presentation. So we'll get an updated response on that particular question with more details.
And last question, Susan, who proposed for Pleasant Plains to become a year-round school?
So, as staff, we've been really open in our conversations over the last 2 or 3 years that all of our elementary schools would at least from a planning point, staff would consider opening all of them on multi-track year round because of our deep need for elementary seats across the district because of those K-3 class size legislation issues. So all of our planning efforts start with the schools opening as multi-track year round so that we can provide the most relief possible to these regions. In addition, by opening them on multi-track year round, that gives us the longest runway before they're full, because we have learned, I mentioned earlier, Apex Friendship Elementary opened in 22-23. It was projected to be 90% full. It was capped by February of that same year. So we have learned our lesson that these areas are going to grow really rapidly, and we need to be thinking about that long-term impact so we're not capping schools so quickly, because capping is not good for the base school, the base school families. It's not good for the overflow school. It's terribly destabilizing for the community and for the schools. So we're working really hard to avoid putting ourselves in a situation where a school opens and is capped in its first year. We'd much rather it gradually fill. And so Pleasant Plains being multi-track will not only accommodate the growth that's coming in that region long term, but it'll also provide relief to the nearby cap schools in the region as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Susan. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. We hope this session has been informative and that you have a better understanding about the recommendations included in the revised draft of the plan. Separately, we appreciate your open and honest participation. Your input and feedback is certainly vital to the refinement of the enrollment plan. And please remember, the board will host a public hearing on November 12th, and we will present the final draft of the plan to the board on November 26th for review and approval. The current thought exchange will remain open through November 3rd, so please continue to post there. And again, thank you so much, and we hope you enjoy the remainder of your evening. Have a great night.
Thank you again so much for your participation tonight. We really appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you.